What I will go ahead and, well, Nada's experiencing a little bit of difficulty, she said, getting into the Zoom. While she's solving that problem, why don't I say a few profound and witty things about the election day and bring people up to date on where we are there. Um, First of all, I should report that we have the first results in. As is the custom each election, Dixville Notch in New Hampshire on midnight cast its first ballots, and they are the first community in the country to cast ballots. And in Dixville, all 5 people who voted for Biden. So I guess he's off to a roaring start. Um, but as you know, it's going to take a while for us to get the votes tabulated and announced for everybody else. So stay tuned for that. On that, I should point out that there are some states that, unlike Wisconsin, were able to begin processing before today. And so that means that they have a leg up on counting, particularly the absentee ballots, which are just, it's a flood of them. A lot of that is really because of the pandemic and people wanting to avoid the risks of voting in person. But it also seems to reflect a certain amount of enthusiasm for participating in this year's election. One state that is able to begin processing, and they started yesterday processing absentee ballots, is Florida. And Florida is a really key state. I think I would agree with those pundits who say that if Florida goes for Biden, it's probably an indication that he is going to win, and maybe win by a fairly substantial margin. He is up in the polls in Florida, but within the margin of error. Other states that that are able to start processing ballots before the beginning of today were Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona. Those are all very, very key states as well. If Biden loses Florida, and we should know that probably tonight or early morning hours tomorrow. If Biden does lose, it doesn't mean that he loses the election. It's just that he's going to have to, there are a number of other ways in which he could still get to the 270 electoral votes. And we'll have to see how that all plays out. The so-called blue wall, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Biden is up in all 3 of those states and beyond the margin of error. So there's a certain amount of optimism looking at the polls. But if you're like me, despite how well things look in the polls, I am nervous. And I will continue to be nervous until we have final results. Nada, you're with us now? Okay, good. Do you want to, let's see, do you want to, okay, so you've unmuted. Let me just give a brief introduction of our guest this morning. Nada Elmikashfi is a very active member of our community. She ran in the 26th Senate District for Wisconsin State Senate and did very, very well. It was a crowded field, and it had someone in who had a lot of name recognition because she had run for governor before, and that disadvantaged, I think, everybody, including Nada. Nada was born in the Sudan, and she came to the United States when she was 6 years old, if I've got that correct, and graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So obviously very bright and very well educated. She is currently working as the Chief of Staff for Francesca Hong, who is an elected member to the Wisconsin State Assembly. I think that one of the things I'd be interested in you commenting on, Nada, is how you see the prospects for the Democrats getting the majority in the assembly. You need 14 pickups, 14 flips in order to get to the majority. Seems like a large number in a gerrymandered area, but there's a fair amount of optimism, and so I'd be interested in yours. And I guess I'd also like to ask your view of genetic theory. I know that you worked with a absolutely brilliant, fantastic, handsome, charming guy to help with your campaign. And you may want to, he's actually on the Zoom with us, as is his father. So begin talking about genetics.
Well, I studied genetics for a bit at UW before I decided to pursue legal studies. But what I did learn is that there's this wonderful gentleman by the name of Aiden Dressing, and he was the digital director for our campaign. And his genius and his compassion, I guess genetically, can be attributed to a certain Dennis Dressing that we have on the phone call with us. I'm guessing that is exactly what you were asking.
Oh, that's it. You got it right.
Yeah?
Okay.
Okay. Awesome. Hi, Aiden. Lovely to see you. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's a pleasure to guest talk. This is the first talk lecture I've ever given with all of you today about the art of campaigning during a pandemic, and then the prospects of the assembly this November. And flipping it, maybe. And, you know, I've never done anything remotely similar to a campaign like this one in my life. So it's been a journey, and I'm grateful for Professor Dressing for your kindness in inviting me. And I really hope I can offset the misery of kind of not knowing what today holds within an hour of knowing at the very least what happened in Madison during the past primary and what we can learn from it. So just to briefly go over, you know, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Elmikashfi. I recently ran for Wisconsin State Senate in the 26th district, which encompasses the city of Madison, a little bit of the town of Madison and the village of Shorewood Hills. I'm 24 years old, and I really decided to run, I think about a year ago this week. So it's been quite the year for myself, and a lot for Madison and the world. And so my American journey starts on a plane from Sudan, Africa to the Dane County Regional Airport. When I was 6 years old, I immigrated to the US after my father won the diversity visa lottery, and I grew up wonderfully here in Madison as part of a hopeful Black immigrant Muslim family. And growing up, we experienced what many low-income families do in Dane County: housing insecurity, job insecurity, and a slew of other things that, you know, some of which I can now attribute as an adult to Wisconsin being the most segregated state in the country and not providing as much opportunity for certain demographics. We moved around a lot when I was growing up, and while my education was solidified mainly around Thoreau Elementary School, Cherokee Heights Middle School, West High School, which is better than Memorial Aid, and UW-Madison, we would pack up our things and find a new apartment every few years, as many families do. And it wasn't really until college when I started organizing with a youth vote national organization called Next Gen America, founded and funded by Tom Steyer, who, if you guys remember, was running as a Democrat for president. And I was then able to kind of articulate and conceptualize the experience that I had had growing up. It wasn't really until I started door knocking and really being engaged in politics, especially around getting disenfranchised voters like college students out to the polls and people of colors, was I able to put a word to what I had lived through and see that it wasn't just my family. I finally knew how to explain the inequity that we grew up with. And I think that, you know, was the working class struggle to make it in a system that left much to be desired. You know, when it came to voting reform, expanding the middle class, housing reform, that really inspired my kind of delve into government and politics. So My time at NextGen taught me about gentrification, red hiking, and it wasn't really until I started working in the Capitol, kind of leaving the organizing world behind, was I really able to see that the system was failing so many people in Madison. But when I was an organizer on the ground, I had this very naive, I'd look at the Capitol when I'd walk down Bascom Hill every day from class, and I never really had the idea that they weren't doing enough for me. I was, sure, like disenchanted with federal government. I held a deep contempt for Governor Walker because he seemed to be the blame for all the conditions of Wisconsin that had left us like this. But I never thought the people in the legislature or in the Democratic caucus were not fighting as hard as they could for us. That kind of complacency I had myself in not questioning the status quo really came crashing down, however, when I took an internship with Senate Minority Leader Jennifer Schilling and a job with our wonderful Governor Tony Evers in the summer of 2019. And there, through a really grueling budget season, I kind of came face to face with the really true reality that a sort of bureaucratic lack of initiative and imagination really weighed down our Democratic caucus. I discovered also, the length that Republicans were willing to go to block progressive policymaking and reform just for the purpose of pissing off Governor Evers. But what stood out to me the most was that it was usually until the very last second that enormous decisions were made. And that Democrats kind of tended to lean towards a defensive, let's see what we can get away with kind of, strategy instead of, what are we unwilling to concede and what will we stand our ground on? And I think that for me, this incrementalism that I saw, on the federal level came to life within the Wisconsin Capitol. And this disconnection from the I think sense of urgency for change that I saw on the grassroots level in local government, in local activism, really made me restless. And I think that, the Democrats inherently lacked as a caucus a sense of imagination to kind of push the limits on the status quo. There wasn't any recklessness, in my opinion, a good recklessness that I felt was the last effort one could have in like a system that was as gerrymandered and difficult to work through as the one we had. So I think it was a sense of disappointment in a lot of what I assumed was the game plan of our I think you can call it democratic legislative machine, really helped me begin toying with the idea that something needed to change and someone with a different kind of strategy and outlook and lived experience needed to be in the Capitol. Instead of, just throwing our hands up in the air and saying, it is what it is. This is what Republicans will let us get away with. Now that I look, back at my own lived experience and how that very much played into why I was so uninspired in what I saw, but hopeful in what could be in the Capitol. I think that came from my background as a Sudanese immigrant. Sudan is a place where democracy doesn't exist, right? Where not only is policy immovable, there is no policy, there is no government service. And so when I see America as the richest country in the world, as this place where we, even in our struggle, we're able to find so much opportunity and hope, it showed me that we do not have to concede to the bare minimum. And this idea that we can ask better from our country was something that was deeply rooted inside of me. And I kind of, in the Capitol, really was faced with this gatekeeping that I saw really left a lot of voices outside of the political conversation. When I was in that room with legislators, when I was talking to them, I really came to face with the idea that you do not have to be rich or hold this kind of house of cards level political strategist tenure and be a JD holder to do justice to representation. All you needed was charisma, working class initiative, and really a dedication to public service to really do that representation justice. I saw farmers in the assembly that would legislate with just as much compassion and ability as the most tenured JD holder. And so for me, kind of looking at what had happened with the lack of diversity, why it was so in the Capitol, the lack of representation of voices that sounded like mine, pushed me to declare and challenge Senator Risser, who, disclaimer, if any of you know him, Small World, is a wonderful person. For me, he wasn't the leader for that specific moment that I saw in Madison and what we needed. And so I met up with him in his office, and he tapped my shoulder and he was like, I'm not going to wish you good luck. But he was such a great person. And I've seen how his 57-year tenure has done good for the city of Madison. I just felt like the direction that we were going into needed a voice that was going to stand up to Republican in a way that has not been done before. And for me, I saw how our democracy had not encouraged anyone to primary him in decades. He's held that seat since 1963. And I think that was because no one thought it was possible. There was this sort of, coronation process of whatever representative was under him to take that seat after he retired. And so for me, I rejected that on the basis that this was not democracy. It wasn't a game of kind of waiting for permission to lead, especially for me, where others have failed to change my specific community, my Muslim, my immigrant, my Black community. And I think I understood public service as inherently the art of being a megaphone, nothing else. How loud and effective one can be in getting across the message of the constituency. And I felt that was the only voice in that moment to ask for. And so it warranted action in my part. And I think that this connects to what we're seeing now in these assembly races, because the idea of what public service is has changed on the national level with people like AOC and Cori Bush and Ilhan Omar, the squad, people that I look up to. They've transformed possibility when it comes to politics, that you can be in a seat not because of a career move, but really because of a way to uplift the working class. And so for me, kind of taking from the inspiration of my community, this idea of not sitting around and waiting and really challenging the status quo when Wisconsin is the most segregated state in the country, was what really pushed me. But what solidified the possibility of what we can get done in the Capitol was one email, one kind of call out that I did in the governor's office that led to, I think, tremendous change with administrative structure. And so I enjoyed very much my tenure in the gubernatorial appointments position with Governor Evers, where we appointed, people to about 300, 400 boards and committees across the state of Wisconsin. And every single day I'd go to the office, and it was such a progressive place, such a kind and caring place, but I was the only Black person there. And one of the very few in the Capitol as a whole. And so it really weighed on my soul. And I wrote an email before I stepped down to run for office to Maggie Gao, the chief of staff. And I said, hey, this is how it is. The responsibility on you, is to change this systematic disenfranchisement that has happened way before you, but is now at a turning point. And so really putting in the prioritization of diversity in paying interns was something that I pushed across. And, the typical argument back was, well, Republicans aren't going to let us have funding for that. It's going to be really hard to change administrative structure to kind of get a paid internship through. And at that point, there weren't any in the Capitol. But 2 months into my campaign, I believe I sent that email in December. She was kind enough to invite me into her office, and we had a discussion about it for like an hour or so. But in February, there was a notification that the governor unveiled a statewide paid internship program, part-time and full-time, geared at diversity in so many different departments in government. And it was unprecedented in Wisconsin and a rarity across the country. And it kind of pushed the Assembly and the Senate to propose bipartisanly the same kind of bill, or a similar one. Hasn't been taken up yet. But for me, I was like, okay, 2 months, this thing that had been a barrier to such a specific policy issue in the Capitol, which is diversity and representation, just because and it was a scary thing to do, to email the chief of staff of the governor, but it was something that I felt was so incredibly important. And because of their prioritization of really progressive issues, because of how they saw how important it was for me as a person of color, they made it happen in 3 months, something that we've never had. And so for me, I kind of declared my candidacy before COVID. So that was around January, February, and March, kind of having that hope that change was possible. The interesting part, so I think now we're going to delve a little bit into what it was like campaigning during COVID, what it was like campaigning as a young person. I didn't know who I was running against. I knew who I was running for about 3 months. I know that Senator Isser was like, I will have a decision by April if I'm going to retire or run again. I talked to Representative Chris Taylor, who made it pretty obvious that she would be running for the seat. And so, right away, we honed in our message and our purpose as running for something, not against someone, and that was running for the working class of Madison. And never was I discouraged at all by the working class to run, but there was incredible pushback and discouragement from the political class in Madison. There were these discussions of, you're so young, you're skipping stepping stones, like, why couldn't you run for school board or city council? There was very much this culture of know your place, wait your turn, that really discourages a lot of women from running for office, a lot of people of color. And I think that stems from, at least what I discovered, a really flawed understanding of what government, is, complacency and kind of what it could be. People would always tell me, like, you have good ideas, you have good policies, valid dreams, you're never going to get them through this Republican legislature. And I think that, not only me, but you see so many people that are in the field now, Christina Shelton, Chris Marion of Dodgeville. There's an 18-year-old named Josephine that's running in Viroqua, Jacob Malinowski around the Milwaukee area that took that kind of idea that we cannot play a waiting game with Republicans. We can't kind of cower down to the GOP. They declared against these sitting incumbents, and now there are seats that are going to flip that we never would have anticipated. So I think the idea of what government is and what public service is slowly changing. And we've seen kind of this rejection of these masters of a broken system. Just because they got really good at what they've become accustomed to doesn't mean that we are kind of married to that blueprint of operation within the Democratic caucus. And I think that, this is lending very much into why you see the success of Democrats in areas that have been held by Republicans for so long. I know that they have received incredible pushback. I also received incredible pushback too. There was a general, fear of what, isms that I had in my policy platform. So like, what if we could have a universal badger care option? What if we completely decarbonize by 2030? What if we had housing first? And so I ran as a Democrat, but I do identify as a democratic socialist. And so early on in my campaign, it felt very lonely. There wasn't that political network to vouch for the supposed gaps in my resume as a 24-year-old, and I knew I had an enormous, uphill battle. But it didn't discourage me, because I realized that within campaigning, when you do not have political capital, there is incredible maneuvering that you can do because you're not tied down to, anything that could make you choose between policy and between your own career. And for me, kind of deciding to run for office, and as I've talked to these other assembly candidates, really came with the idea that if we could show creativity in maneuvering these structural barriers in a campaign, that experience would really help, surely at least, maneuver similar barriers as a legislator with the opposing side. And so our hope is very much rooted in the working class. It's something that I hear a lot from them. And I think that is really appealing to these voters, and why, Joel Jacobson is giving Voss a run for his money, which is something we could have never imagined. For me, the campaigning process before the shutdown in March was very, I think, normal for what a campaign usually is. I was lucky enough to have been also running a campaign during that semester for Dane County Board Supervisor Elena, who won. And we were both full-time students at UW, and it was the District 5, which is a little bit of campus, kind of the Langdon area, Eagle Heights as well. And it kind of gave me a grip on rudimentary campaign structure. I would be lying if I said that it was kind of a full understanding of what a Senate race would entail that I got, but it really helped me hone in, those organizing skills in this particular community, and kind of get an idea of what a Senate race on a much larger scale against a 57-year incumbent would take. And so I had built this years-long experience of knowing kind of how to reach people out on the grassroots level, but really more importantly, how to turn out constituencies that did not want to, right? How to talk to people from a space of, I am where you are, I've been as disenchanted as you are, but here's what I've learned. And so figuring out right away that I had zero political capital, it hit me in the face, kind of being that new kid on the block, was incredibly tough. And unlike a lot of my opponents and who typically run in these races, I didn't have a huge fundraising book. With COVID, we made the decision not to door knock, right? Usually candidates, who defeat incumbents do so with incredible grassroots organizing that they use to offset structural barriers to winning. So door knocking, canvassing, hours of talking to constituencies, dollars and name recognition of the incumbent can be outpaced just enough to get you your win number if you outwork them and outconnect them with the constituency. But with COVID, that became really, really incredibly difficult. And so an already seemingly very, very difficult task became so much more, I never want to use the word impossible, but in some moments, to be completely truthful, that's what it felt like. And so I made the executive decision not to canvass to protect the safety of myself and my community. And that was an easy decision to make. My mom is immunocompromised. I know so many Wisconsinites are in such a riskful place of this virus, and it's been incredibly moving to see members of my own party decide not to do that. Other issues that in regards to COVID that a lot of campaigns across Wisconsin, across the country have dealt with is really, how do you ask for money during a time of economic strife, right? Why was an election and electing someone more important than the incredible hardships that people were experiencing because of a global pandemic? And so I never really knew how to answer that question. And by March, when I found out that both Senator Risser and Representative Taylor retired on the same day, within the same hour, the whiplash I got from that, I'm never going to recover from. But the field became increasingly crowded. By June, there were 7 candidates, including me, which was really annoying for myself and my campaign, but it was an incredible testament to the power of democracy and initiative, in my opinion. But it also, made it so much harder to kind of set a budget for what a campaign like this would be like when you are trying to get your name recognition out from zero, when you're dealing with someone like Senator-elect Calderoy, who's run for, governor, who's run for Congress, who served in the assembly. And so it was really an uphill battle. And so I knew right away that we had to translate, in terms of strategy, whatever organizing power to one that was digital. And I think that is why you see such a kind of, at least for me, as someone who was a candidate talking and connecting to these other candidates, this is why you see such a transformation in the way we've been campaigning and the way results have shown up and polls have shown up to this moment. And I think if there was one field that I knew I could do well in, it was social media, not just because of my age, but because of the tool of social media that I've used for years. And so within COVID, I think we found around the state of Wisconsin, and Madison particularly, that there has been more political engagement. We can attribute that to Trump. We could attribute that to, COVID having people more plugged in, looking for more stuff to read. But that meant that politics was kind of more in your face for a lot of people. And so you saw this spike in interaction within the community to campaigns that were online and that were visible. And so quarantine really made an incredible market to combine social media and people that have not been politically engaged. And so that brought us again to the question of cost. We were going up and that had the ability to self-fund and establish donor base. I was a broke college student at that point, and we knew that she would, without a doubt, raise more than us in name recognition, cost money to build. And that is the unfortunate reality of democracy. Whoever outspends the other will usually win. And this is kind of the conclusion that so many strategists have come across the state, across the country. And something that they told me all the time when I would ask for advice is, you need to raise money, which was, again, incredibly difficult. And so for us, lots of people with money in specific campaigns are just able to reach more people. That's how it works. It is a vehicle for a message. And if their message is similar enough to yours, where people are not actively looking for a replacement of that way of thinking, researching a different candidate before election day is not constant. And so we're doing a lot of work on the ground right now that my campaign is over, of kind of looking at my colleagues that were candidates then, how much they're spending, how much getting a vote costs, per vote, if they use different sorts of graphics, different sorts of kind of avenues. Did they get more return? What does engagement look like from young campaigns that use kind of progressive imaging versus establishment imaging? And so, the results aren't conclusive enough for me to share, but there is a trend of kind of, the catchier, the more individualized, and the more radical a message is, the better it is, and the cheaper it is to spread around. And so our first instinct, myself and my advisors, kind of to build a message and vehicle that message through social media at very little cost. That's what we knew would push us across the finish lines. How many shares could we get across various platforms? How could we draw people in to the hope we were kind of offering in a way that was organic, because we could not reach these people in person. I don't know how I answered, the questions of, is this going to be effective? I think we just said, let us, find out what we can get away with, because this has always been an uphill battle. And so this is just a small part outside of the messaging and the policy that we really wanted to see in Madison. But what we kind of soon found out was authenticity, the ability to break political norms by kind of speaking your mind and questioning the powers that be, the ability to call out BS for what it was. It found a really captivated audience that kind of had been yearning for something that wasn't politics as usual. And so what I have been doing, you know, for years on social media, which is being loud and being unapologetic, worked, right? And so my analysis appealed to an intergenerational and a multiracial constituency in Madison who kind of viewed the policies we spoke about as things that they really connected. It was a political voice and tone that they had not seen before. And so you see that across these assembly races is people, you know, my friends in other districts, they're very few of them are Democratic Socialists. Their political, you know, viewpoints range from a variety of different things, yet their messaging hints at this, you know, dedication to, you know, it doesn't have to be this bad, as Biden puts it. You know, we did not have to get here, but we are here because of the GOP. And so kind of that really, I don't think mine was certainly abrasive because this is a safe district, but for other districts, there is this kind of truth telling that people, especially in this time, are really connecting with. And I think that we will see that in the results that come out of today. And so what tactics we use and what tactics other progressive assembly candidates are using right now is kind of building agency in policy platforms in order to help expand relational organizing, this idea of you know, reaching out to a voter and having them reach out to their friends, their family, their network. And so for us, what I think was incredibly helpful for me was a kind of test of what I would be as a legislator, was how we built our platform. And we did that with teachers advising on education, you know, and they helped get our message through their circles. We got the endorsement of MTI, one of the largest teachers unions in the state. And we had, you know, union members from different industries advise on our labor platform, which helped us get the endorsement of other labor unions. And so for me, what I saw the first time candidate, what that did was really, really kind of helped me stay accountable to these groups. You know, if I had taken office, I knew exactly what they needed from me. I knew what I would do, what I'd need to do to be a megaphone for it. But in terms of organizing in a time of COVID, it expanded and disseminated our message on a larger scale than we could have imagined. I think we also definitely would need to pay heed to the Black Lives Matter movement and the unfortunate death of George Floyd for also shifting the conversation in our race. For me, there was a very pivotal moment in momentum. And again, this kind of power of social media as a new age campaign tool really hit us in the face. And so I got into a bit of hot water for tweeting F your statues after the statues of Lady Forward and Colonel Haig were taken down in front of the Capitol. And so I could get into why I said that, but for me, there was, I think within liberal Madison, this disconnect between valuing property over valuing Black lives. And when we saw, you know, someone getting, you know, murdered, there was this need of shifting the conversation into, you know, this is unacceptable and we need to change the dynamics around what we talk about in terms of racial equity. And so that tweet, I think whether you agree with it or not, it did open up a lot of communication. But what it did for the campaign was completely unimaginable. It wasn't my intention. I tweeted it after being incredibly moved emotionally by what I saw around the country. But we raised from that specific tweet $20,000 in a couple weeks. We had almost none before that. It was the beginning of our momentum. And we were really able to not only get, you know, we got a lot of negative press attention. My relationship with the press is not the best one. We, you know, kept getting portrayed. The only portrayal that I would get in the media outside of publications of color would be, you know, she's angry, she said this, this is, a deterioration of politics as usual. This is kind of, I got called an extremist, death threats, like people put ransoms on my execution. Aiden would filter all the messages, so he definitely knows a lot about that. But for me, what that tweet also did, and the conversations we had aside from that, fostered a lot of conversation within the community that got our message across. And so from the money that we were able to raise close to $70,000 in 3 months, which is unprecedented for someone that has zero political capital, again, as myself. We were able to pay a campaign team of 4 paid staff, which is unheard of in Madison, and in Senate races full time. And so, a really big important piece for me was that, labor has to be fair. This idea of paying people a lot more than I was advised was something that was integral to not only the values of our campaign, but the way that we were able to talk to our message from a place of actually doing it. And so that message of working class value really translated into working class fundraising for a campaign that was not expected. Like, if I could just, box up all the criticisms and that you're not going to get anywhere into a box and show it to you guys, but we far outraised, not in dollar amount, but in number of donations than any other candidate in the field, including Kelda Roy's. We were double her the majority of the time. So at the end of the second reporting deadline, I believe we had 200 individual donations to Kelda's about 800. And so we had incredible diversity in donors. It was an incredible, long, varied list of different working class groups that would give, our average donation never went above $25. And so, we didn't have any consultants. We were able to use that money and just push it towards engagement, pushing it towards telling people, this is our message, but more importantly, your voice matters. You need to get out the vote and you need to participate in your democracy at all times. And so we didn't pay any consultants. We just were able to kind of transform that grassroots organizing in Facebook ads. I think we did Instagram ads as well in lit drops. So we didn't canvas, but we printed out really nice literature and an effective literature, which is another point, and dropped it off around Madison. And so our message got out in 3 months, and it wouldn't have happened without Twitter. It wouldn't have happened maybe as fast without that specific tweet that really pushed the envelope on decorum. So, we didn't win. But from zero name recognition, we were able to get 13,000 votes to the 19,000 of an established figure like Kelda Roy's, who had about 100% name recognition in 3 months, that I would argue. And so second place in a 7-way primary, where the third place person was way below us, I believe at like 5,000, you can correct me at that. It wasn't enough for a seat, but it was enough to show us what was possible on a grassroots level in times of COVID, in a place like Madison, in a campaign that did not have that establishment support, that structural support. And so the power of social media got our message to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who endorsed us. Planned Parenthood endorsed us. The Democratic Socialists of America, the national groups endorsed us. Sunrise, the Climate Coalition endorsed us. And so there was a coalition that got to see our message because of the power of Twitter, because of the power of the working class initiative that it had. And so that coalition included far left, as I am, included moderates and even conservative voters. And I don't know if you guys know who Dave Blaska is, who is an obnoxious, I think, yes, far right blogger in the city of Madison. He was campaigning for me because he said, not as the destruction of the Democratic Party, they deserve her. And so I think the coalition, I include him too, because he did a lot. And so we had hundreds of volunteers at some point, to literature drop, to text, to phone bank. And so for me, that speaks to, again, my disappointment in the party, especially within this election cycle, because for us, we were, paying heed to every single person in Madison, not just what the VAN database gave us, right? VAN is a program that the party uses to kind of collect addresses, figure out who's registered and who's not. And those voter lists really, really disenfranchised. They do not include communities that have not historically voted. And so, a lot of campaigns in safe districts like this, a lot of campaigns across the state of Wisconsin rely only on people that have historically voted, which, statistically are white, right? And so there has been this kind of complacency that I rejected right away with, not only are we going to appeal to every single person in Madison, we're going to make sure that we are effective in bringing new voices in, not just because of our primary, but also because of this November election for Donald Trump. And so for me, that meant organizing like crazy in my Muslim American, my African immigrant groups. And we had people that, would tell us, I have never been asked before. My own mom hadn't voted before that. And she'd say, Neda, I feel like I'm a guest in this country and I'm not allowed to have my voice, heard in that way. But fortunately, I've seen a lot of organizing in different communities, in assembly races across the state of Wisconsin, because people tend to think that the rural areas of Wisconsin are just white when they are actually very diverse, right? I had this real desire of being able to travel around Wisconsin from a safe seat. And this is something Representative-Elect Francesca Hong of the 76th district is doing to encourage the vote around the state of Wisconsin, incorporate new voices into the conversation. When you have districts that were determined Republican by 45 votes in areas where there is a incredibly rich and diverse and politically in tune immigrant, Somali or Sudanese population, getting them registered and voting is the difference between a Democratic majority and not. And so my beef with the party has always been that is not something that they have taken up. And so we got our marginalized communities in this race. We made sure to get them registered and voting. And so before I run out of time, I think what this means for our future is that, we are so very close to making Wisconsin what it should be. And I think you see this movement towards a working class agenda in so many seats, but also in different political, sides of the political spectrum. I think for a lot of people, it's not just about what political party someone is, but it's who are we fighting for? And so a little insider, I have, admittedly I've had my brain kind of semi shut off since August because a year of campaigning makes you a little crazy. So I haven't been in tune very much with specific races, but I know the Democrats expect 10 seats to flip, which is insane. So I don't know if it's going to be enough for a majority, or enough to usher in a Democratic trifecta. But I think what it is going to do is really bring us closer to kind of limiting the dreams of the GOP of a supermajority or a veto-proof majority. And I think Voss had a goal, he said this in the press, of building up a veto majority of 66 of 99 members to override Evers' vetoes, which are a saving grace. But last month, he said that Republicans only have about a 30% chance of securing such a majority because of Democrats have raised so much money. And so there are 3 seats that I'm looking at specifically that were not ever assumed to have to flip. Again, Josephine and Viroqua, who is 18, Jacob Malinowski, who is in the Milwaukee area, who is 22, and then Chris Marion in Dodgeville. We were door knocking for her yesterday in I believe it was Iowa County. Those are all people that are about to flip. And pundits say that it's because of the influx of cash that Democrats are putting in this seat. But I actually think that is such an erasing thing. And I think I'll leave you guys with this. It's because I have our beef with the Democratic Party, at least my beef and some of my colleagues, has been that these races have been just as viable from the very beginning that they announced. And we only saw that kind of attention and that giving them the resources that they need right now. And so I think for Joel Jacobson, who is literally giving Voss a run for his money, I know Voss is pulling money away from other races within the committee or some way, because he's afraid. The help that the Democratic Party gave him would have been so instrumental if it had come even weeks before. So I'm not sure that that seat will flip, but crazier things have happened. And so this speaks to a necessity of our party, of myself, politicians like the ones I've met in the field, to really kind of reimagine what campaigning is, to look at these races and think what is possible, not what is a barrier and what can set us up to fail, but rather what can we gain. And I think reality, and people can argue with me on this, has a distinctive liberal bias. I think with more and more people armed with the right to vote, more and more views are represented, I think our country skews left. So there's a reason why Texas might flip or is getting there. And that's because, the more and more people wake up and the more and more people are registered to vote, the more democratic our country is. So I've learned a lot in this campaign. I've learned a lot from, the incredible help that we got from members of my team, for people like Aiden, who was so incredibly, instrumental in getting us that kind of climate change youth activism behind our campaign that lent the people power. And so anyone who is thinking of running, any of these politicians need to understand that you can't just pay heed to youth power during an election cycle. You need to foster it and grow it outside of just campaigning. And I think that Ed Markey does this so well, and he did it so well, where he really encouraged the youth vote in policy and not just in volunteering. And I think that is the direction that our country is going. And I'm so honored to have been able to fight so hard for it, and I hope to continue to fight the same. So I welcome any of your questions. I hope that, that was kind of interesting for this particular day in American history.
Yeah, it was great. Kurt, you were monitoring questions. What have we got?
Yeah, I've looked at a couple. The one question I got, will you run again?
I'm planning on it. I don't like to I'm just, for now, I'm doing the same job I would have if I ran for Senate, which is being in the Capitol with Francesca Hong and getting those progressive policies through, working on raising the minimum wage. She's a business owner working on a Green New Deal, which I'm doing for the state of Wisconsin. I'm doing the exact same work. So we'll see if my voice is needed somewhere. I'm not canceling it out completely, but I also don't want to be like, I'm going to run for this and this and this. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah. One question somebody had was, just define more what a democratic socialist, what that means to you.
Yeah.
And what do you, and versus. Yeah.
For me, I think democratic socialism really appealed to me because it was this kind of idea that incrementalism and moderation within policy as the sky, as the ceiling, is really something that fosters incredibly anti-working class values. And so while I appreciate and call myself a Democrat and donate to Democrats and ran as a Democrat, for me, my political alignment is much more not radical, but sees incrementalism in the way of getting very high attainable goals like, universal healthcare, universal broadband, as something that within my own political philosophy appeals better. And so I think democratic socialism for me is this idea that, you don't just work for your country works for you. And this idea of kind of looking at capitalism from a lens of criticism of how it has exploited labor and human beings in a way that is not, conducive with democracy. And so it's something that's ever evolving, ever changing for me. But it's definitely a place where I found really true intersectionality that has been missing from the Democratic Party, at least from what I've seen. And so for my own self and my own experience, I don't see them necessarily as two separate, distinct entities that you have to choose one or the other. But I feel that democratic socialism is going to be, or at least moving very progressive, is going to be how we keep our party alive in the next 10, 20 years.
What's the biggest or probably most poignant lesson you learned from running?
From running, I think I have to tell you guys this story. I tell it all the time, so I tried to avoid telling it today, but I guess we're gonna go there. As in 2018, I was door knocking for, I think it was Governor Evers, maybe, in Lodi, Wisconsin. And I, was wearing a black hijab, which is a scarf, all black backpack. It was the first time door knocking and canvassing. And Lodi, Wisconsin is like 30 minutes away. And I was like, oh my God, is this the North Woods? Like, is this the northest of Wisconsin? Which, no, it was not. But my organizer dropped me off. And in my head, I was so scared, and I don't get scared often. And I remember holding my literature in front of me when I got up to the first door, and my hands were shaking because I was really, really afraid that people would see me as something I wasn't, that would see me as a terrorist or a radical or as an extremist. I've been walking by the Granger School of Business, and I've had people like be incredibly violent towards me because of my religion. And I went up to that first door, and I was like ready to just run all the way back to the west side of Madison. And this older white lady, like, she slammed open the door. She had Republican signs on her lawn, and she was like, honey, it's 100 degrees outside. I know you're fasting. It's Ramadan. Do you want to come in? And in that moment, I was like, I am such an idiot. I fell into this idea that Trump had been pushing, that the alt-right, even Democrats were pushing, that we were all hateful and all separated ideologically, and that we couldn't find that common connection. And she like, I told her, no, it's okay. I have a couple doors to do, but I appreciate you inviting in. And she was like, I'm not going to vote for your person. But we had such an incredible conversation about healthcare. And she and I did not agree on necessarily the path towards getting there, but we agreed that, both our neighbors shouldn't be in financial ruin just because they went to the doctor. And so for me, the biggest lesson there was, there's a lot more goodness in the world than we like to think. There's a lot more goodness in the world than there is bad, which is why I'm so hopeful for this election tonight. And it's kind of what's keeping me sane right now. But I think the single biggest lesson I've learned is if you are afraid of people judging you, you need to make sure that you're not judging them.
There was one question. You made a comment about Wisconsin being one of the most segregated states. What's your basis for that? What makes you say that?
So that is a study that has been done. It's something that's been cited a lot, is that Wisconsin, in terms of racial equity markers, is the last for so much, for education, for housing equity, for voting rights. And so we are statistically the last for so many different things that relate to racial equity. And so it is a metric that I think is incredibly disappointing, that it's gotten worse. It wasn't like this. It's gotten to this point recently. We've always been near the bottom, but certainly not the last. And so when I saw that there was a Democratic trifecta back in, I don't know what it was, 2010, when I saw that there was I was 14. When I saw that there was a Democratic trifecta, and that disenfranchisement and that disparity was still happening even then, it really turned my eye to this lack of looking at educational achievement gaps. So why are Black and brown children have such gaps between them and white children, as this idea of a gap in opportunity, not in a gap of what those specific students, their ability or their mastering specifically of certain educational opportunities. It's because they, so many communities that are disenfranchised, people of color, go through housing insecurity. They deal with gentrification and displacement. They deal with these issues that stem from environmental degradation, like even the F-35s and unclean drinking water has scientific traceable effects on communities of color, on little Black boys that we label as aggressive, we label as these criminals, but there are ways where we can see how their childhood and the lack of resources and equity and the opportunity that they have been provided and their parents stems into why a percentage is supposedly more likely to be in jail or be incarcerated. And so for me, Wisconsin is the most segregated, and you see it around us. You see it in Madison, the most progressive city, and yet the figures on the disparities between white residents and Black residents is huge. And so it's something that I can put in links to look at, but it is one of the biggest problems in our state.
I noticed you had Next Gen, and you mentioned this Next Gen America. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, Next Gen America is a youth organizing program that was started by billionaire Tom Steyer, who ran for president. And so it started as a climate change activism org based in California. And then in 2018, he pushed millions and I think hundreds of millions of dollars into organizing in 11 important states across the country, one of which Wisconsin, and I got hired here. And so what we would do is we would organize on college campuses, we'd organize in disenfranchised communities and in a nonpartisan way, and just get people registered to go out and vote. And so I like to say that we contributed greatly to Governor Evers winning here. There's been so much youth vote power across the state across the country, where Next Gen America has contributed directly towards flipping certain seats in the blue wave. And they have continued to do that now. And so the returns on how many kids and young people early voted in this election alone, I think pays heed to the work they, among other groups, have been doing to get out that power. So check them out. They probably have texted all of you.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense, Nada, that there is a big gap between generations? I mean, when you interact with people of our generation that are older and wiser and better looking, do you have any problems, or is there a gap there?
Funny enough, I actually get along sometimes better with older, more moderate generations than with my own Democratic Socialist colleagues of my own age. I think that in every political climate, there's this established way of doing things that is not necessarily monolithic in the age group. We tend to see it kind of veer towards older generations. And this idea of why does everything have to be this way from younger kids? And so I think that in every generation, there's a lived experience that really, really contributes to what values, what policies that generation wants to see. But I don't think that bridge of connection is burned all the time. I think that if there was more communication, I think we have a crisis of communication within the Democratic Party, within younger constituents and older ones, that disallow us from seeing that shared lived experience that we do have, that shared value and that shared kind of wanting of a better life. And so I think any differences in strategy, in approach, has to do with maybe a lived experience that's different rather than an age thing. But there's a trend, you can link it.
What about policy issues? Or do you think your generation is, maybe it's not different, but what would you identify as the top policy issues?
Well, I think for younger generations, climate change is incredibly important. Climate justice is something that, is coming about, and we're really understanding it now. And I think with the power of the internet, that information is more accessible to younger generations who have now gotten used to, looking up these really kind of hard to grapple with, I think, conceptualization of climate change and what that means, and they've been able to root that in activism in a different way. But I think that there is an ongoing conversation about climate justice. So not looking at climate change as just this scientific phenomenon, but looking at how race and economic disparity is going to affect it. And I think within younger generations, we've reclaimed this constitutional idea of intergenerational equity, that we have responsibility for future generations to maintain the earth in a habitable, in a productive, in a clean way. And so what I've seen is that younger generations understand that environment, and I studied environmental studies at UW, so I'm a little biased, but they understand that environmental problems are going to be the basis of so much, food insecurity around the world, so much, power differentials and power struggles, and this resource, struggle that we're going to have. And so for me personally, that is what I see one of the most important, I'll just say it, the most important issue going forward, because it underlies the basis of so many other ones also. And I also serve, disclaimer, on the Sustainable Madison Committee for the city of Madison. So I kind of have to say that, but yeah.
Let me ask two questions about technology. One is, you mentioned that you had to rely a lot on social media because of the pandemic in part, but you found that pretty effective. And I wonder if you could sort of elaborate on that and kind of broaden it to, do you see generally that there are some policy issues dealing with technology, internet technology, that we need to be very mindful of? The other question is quite different, but related to social media. It used to be that the key concern for getting money to a campaign was television advertising, that you had to advertise on television, and that was the most expensive campaign expenditure. Has that changed with social media? What did you spend most of your money on?
Yeah, I mean, the first half of that question, there are so many issues with social media. Not only does it, I think the idea of how disinformation travels, especially when it comes to elections, the impact of Facebook on our electoral process from just 2016 is something we haven't even grappled with enough, at the extent of the harm that it's done. And so I think there's always give and takes. I think social media, not only has it bridged gaps in communication, in life experiences that we would not have seen otherwise. We have people that would never interact with certain types of people communicating with them in threads every single day. That is going to, encourage kind of the idea that we all have a shared humanity. Of course, there's trolls. Of course, there's, doxing and negative implications of being that accessible to so many people. And I've certainly experienced that with the amount of hate that I got. So while it's a very incredibly important tool for messaging, it isn't rainbows all the time. I think also the idea of how dependent we have become on social media has meant that it is a utility now. Students cannot learn without it. We see, education in times of COVID really depending on a child's ability to maintain a steady, fast, constant internet connection. And so with disenfranchised groups, that's not available. And I'm grateful for the work the state and the local city have done to ensure internet access. But for me, that translates into into really moving forward in terms of policy and understanding what the needs of 2020 America is, which is universal broadband, especially when it comes to connecting rural areas with resources, with government services, with mental health care, with telehealth care, with education and schooling. And so for me, one of the biggest things that I hope Representative Hong takes up is universal broadband, because not only do I think that that is one of the solutions where we bridge the divide between urban and rural America, it's also where we start to mend the abandonment that Democrats have had for, the places that aren't Madison and Milwaukee, and that have led and contributed to Trump's 4-year term that we're hopefully getting out of today. And so I think that the power of the internet is so incredibly important. And then the second half of your question, I didn't do any TV ads. That would have been lovely to do, but we definitely didn't have the money for it because it is expensive. But we didn't see a necessity for it. It never crossed our minds, because social media is, I think, an equal, if not better, factor of advertisement than TV, especially if you're targeting specific generations. I think that during COVID, that has become even more true. I don't remember the last time I opened a TV if it wasn't just for a presidential debate. And maybe that's something that's a testament to 24-year-olds, because that's also something I hear from my friends is we don't watch TV. We're on our phones, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we get those ads. And so there is more kind of just exposure to political messaging. And I know my mom constantly, as a voter, is getting these YouTube ads from the Biden campaign with so we speak Arabic, with Arabic wording, with better information. And so the amount of times she gets to see that over and over again, she can tell you how to vote now when she didn't know that before August. And so TV, I think it's not. I think it's a staple. I think it's important if you really want to get your vote number up. I don't think in this, at least, particular time in American history, it's going to make or break your campaign.
How did your family end up in Wisconsin?
So I asked them yesterday. It was so cold, and I was like, you won the diversity visa lottery and you could have picked from 50 states. Why did you pick here? And I still have no clue how to answer that one. They were like, at least it wasn't Minnesota, which shade to anyone from Minnesota on this call.
I have one last question for both of you. Are they going to be able to call the election, the presidential election tonight? This is just an opinion from both of you.
I'm actually, in a couple minutes, I'm going to interview a Harvard historian professor named Alex Keyser. Oh my God, I forgot his name. And he, studies the Electoral College as it's moved. He just wrote a really great book on why do we still have the Electoral College. And I think he said in an interview, absolutely not. It's not going to be determined today. So I don't know very much about federal electoral processes. So I'm going to take his word on it.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on, I think it depends a lot on Florida, because Florida is going to be able to give us results, if not by midnight, shortly thereafter, just because they're able to start processing their votes early. And if Florida goes for Biden, as I mentioned kind of before, I think that the Democrats can start uncorking the champagne. If Trump wins, then I think it's going to take a while. And there is a common expectation that we ought to be aware of. I'm not sure I fully buy into it, but according to polling, and when you put the polling together with the early voting, there is a common projection that the initial votes that are going to be counted, the absentee votes, are going to be very, very favorable to Biden, and the in-person is going to be favorable to Trump. So with that in mind, you could have a sequence depending on the state where it looks like Biden wins, but then Trump seems to be catching up and maybe even can surpass him, or vice versa. And when you get those kinds of scenarios, then you're going to have much more anxiety, and then you're going to have to wait until all the votes are counted, which may take at least until the end of this week. I think there's some possibilities that it is going to take a while, but I kind of would be a little bit surprised. Wisconsin, we only start counting our ballots as of 7 a.m. this morning, but the kind of process, particularly in Dane County and the city of Madison, and to some extent in Milwaukee and around the state, is such that those votes are going to get counted pretty quickly. We're not going to have to wait for days before they get processed. Wisconsin may be cold, but we're good.
Very good. One question early on, Dennis, that somebody asked was what do you think of ranked voting, ranked choice voting?
I love it. Yeah, Maine is the state that's using ranked choice voting, and we've got a lot of smaller communities. The Minneapolis area, there are a number of local governments that used ranked voting. Those of you who may not be fully familiar with it, it's that what you do is you not only vote for your first choice, but you indicate which candidate is your second choice or third choice and the like. My guess is that Nada would be a state senator-elect if we had ranked choice voting, because what would happen is that if no candidate gets more than 50% of the vote, then what you do is you take those candidates who didn't get hardly any votes, those on the bottom of the list, and you would take their second choice votes and add that to whichever candidates are left and see if somebody gets 50% or more. And you keep doing that until somebody gets 50% or more. So on the one hand, it's not plurality that wins, it's majority, that's good. But the other thing is that when candidates have to campaign with the notion that it not only counts for them to get first place votes, but to get second place votes, the whole campaign inherently becomes much more civil. You're not going to do things that are really going to be very hostile to the supporters of other candidates. And that's been the experience where we have had ranked choice voting. And by the way, ranked choice voting is an option. That's something that states can choose, like Maine did. We don't need constitutional amendments for that. City of Madison, Dane County, local governments can have ranked choice voting. That's really up to them. So, yeah, I'm a fan. What do you think, Nada?
100% agree.
Good. Thank you. I think we covered most of the questions.
Okay. Well, why don't we call it a day? Thank you very much. This was very, very informative, very inspirational, and we really appreciate the time and the passion, very much so. Just a word about next week. Next week, we are going to talk about what happens today. We'll talk about election results. I kind of go through that for President, Wisconsin State Assembly, for the US Senate races, et cetera. And I hope everybody brings their questions and comments and wisecracks with them because we want to have as open a discussion as possible. So again, Nada, thank you very, very much for being active and involved, as well as for the hour and a half that you've spent with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored that you'd spend such a historical day listening to me talk. Good luck to all of you tonight.
Okay. Okay, so long, everyone.